right. Well, we are back. My apologies for all the missed sessions and how this has just been going of late. It's really it's a combined effect of my terrible organization skills mixed with my terrible technological skills, mixed with just all around scatterbrainness. And what else could we throw in there to give this some sort of excuse? But we are back, and we've got the coronavirus going around, of course, and that's got to affect something, right? I've got to be able to blame something on the coronavirus. So there's that, and so hopefully, with all those things aside, we're able to move forward here. Back in the saddle, got Chris on the line with me, and here's the sad news: we recorded a whole awesome thing for you guys about the Imago Dei, this Kleinian excellence oozing out of the Zoom screen. It was just, it was amazing. And then I realized that I hadn't recorded my voice all throughout. And so we couldn't run that one. I tried to fake it. I had Chris's voice, and I was pretending to talk to him the whole way through. But it got very, very weird. And so I stopped doing that. and so we thought, you know what, let's just run it again. And it's probably gonna not be exactly what we talked about last time, but it'll be more or less we'll start with the same topic and see where it goes. How's that, Chris?
It sounds good to me.
All right. Well, what I wanted to do originally was just look at something of Klein's view of the image of God, and because of, I mean, it is truly an amazing idea. I feel like we could probably spend 10 podcasts on it quite easily, and hey, maybe we'll do that. But it's just that it has so many different levels to it. It has so much importance to it. I'm sort of growing in my appreciation of the fact that it's very connected to his particular brand of covenant theology. It's gonna, it really gets at the heart of what's different about his concept of merit and the covenant of works to what you might find in your classic sort of Westminster formulation. And there's even some of the Westminster Confession that has a wording that's a little bit uncomfortable. And we've kind of dealt with that before. We will probably deal with it again, just in terms of the merit thing and the condescension of God to enter into a covenant. But, just to make a start and just keep thinking about the subject and maybe just provide a little bit of clarity to anyone who cares, let's just chat a little bit more around this concept of the image of God. I realized that that on its own, just even without a Kleinian influence, is a big topic, and there's a lot that has been said throughout the ages on the image of God. A lot of different takes on that, and there still are. And it's almost like one of those areas where it's just a little bit up for grabs. Anyone can go for it and kind of fill that in with what they are interested in. But what I think, and what we said last time, and maybe this is just helpful to kick us off with the basic framework, is that you have, over the years, a few categories, without getting into too much detail now, just categories that people have that you might, or I don't want to say used to understand the image of God, but their understandings fall in one of these categories. The first is, I don't know, you could call it an ontological, substantive category, where basically they are just saying, what is it about man that's different from the animals? With, there are a whole lot of different things. Let's zone in on one of those things, and typically you have one of the church fathers kind of grab hold of one of these attributes and just run with it all the way through to Calvin, I think. And then you have, on the other hand, kind of more Barthian, as I understand it anyway, more sort of in that modern, contemporary, maybe neo-orthodox sort of zone. You are looking at more of a kind of relational view, where they are trying to get more, to their credit, more towards the text in Genesis, and saying, listen, when God made man in his image, he created the male and female, and this is a relational thing. It reflects the relationship of the triune Godhead. There's something about relationship, community, and they really run with that idea, and it takes various forms. And then perhaps, I don't know, for me it seems probably what is most close to the Kleinian view is this kind of functional bucket, where a lot of people have again tried to stick to the text, but have said, no, the issue is not so much relationship. The issue is that man was given this dominion. His function on earth was to essentially have dominion and rule, and especially as you relate that to the ancient Near Eastern treaties, you see, or at least just the ancient Near East setting, you see that term image of God is used, and often refers to a vice regent of some sort or a vassal king, or even just, you can imagine kind of Pharaoh representing some divinity, and he would be thought of as in the image of God. And so there's all those kinds of thoughts running around, which feels like it's got the closest to the actual idea for me, because it's taking that context in mind. It's got the text in mind. And then, of course, you got Klein come along. And what we did actually say is that you might end up coming across a guy named Kleins. That's a C and with the S at the end, which is just interesting that this guy is also rolling around in that same sort of bracket. But that's not Klein. That's Kleins. Right, and it's not a plural of Klein either. It's another guy, and so there's that guy, and then Klein comes along, and more or less in that vicinity starts to flesh it out even more, and it's almost like he incorporates all of it, somehow, but he keeps it focused on the text, which is great. So with that in mind, I don't know, Chris, are you happy to just give us a little rundown of what Klein basically held to there, just at an initial thumbnail sketch level?
Sure. I mean, I'll hone in on the three aspects that he talks about in terms of the image of God in human beings. This isn't a fair summary of the entire book, Images of the Spirit. There's just so much material there. But when we're talking about how it is that you and I and each of our listeners is made in the image of God, Klein says that the first one is a functional reflection of the image of God, or another way he puts it is official. And that is seen in the almost the office of the authority to declare things right or wrong, and the exercise of dominion. So we see that in the garden when the devil comes and tempts Eve, and says, well, God just doesn't want you to eat the fruit because he doesn't want you to be like him. He doesn't want you to know the difference between good and evil. And it's not, Klein was careful to point out that it's not that Adam and Eve didn't know what good and evil were before they ate the fruit. It was that judicial function of making the declaration that this thing is good and that thing is bad or wrong. And unfortunately, they plunged themselves into a condition of being morally wrong, in that particular episode. But we see it come back up in Genesis 6-8, and at the end of the flood episode, God gives them, look, it's going to be civil government's role to exercise this function of bearing my image in declaring things wrong and punishing those things that are wrong. The second aspect that he talks about, it probably resonates the most with the traditional understanding of the image of God in most systematic theologies, and that's the ethical, where we reflect the holiness and the righteousness and the truth of God. And we see this probably the most clearly in the biblical injunction to be holy as I am holy. So just as we see God's holiness expressed in who he is and what he does, we're supposed to imitate that same thing, to be as much like our Creator as human creatures can be. But then I think it's the third aspect where he's completely original in terms of the history of systematic theology, at least as far as I can tell, and that is this formal or physical aspect to the image of God, where our bodies will, in the resurrection, reflect the um, Klein used the phrase physical luminosity, luminosity meaning brightness of God himself, the same kind of brightness that we see, for example, in the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that led Israel. When the gospel writers talk about the Mount of Transfiguration, the cloud that covers the mountain is a bright, shining cloud, those kinds of things. And when we read about Jesus in Revelation, he's so bright that John falls down to the ground.
Right.
So it's those kinds of things that Klein says we should see something about what we have to look forward to in our resurrection bodies there.
Right. Glorification, essentially, right?
Yeah, right.
But just putting a sort of biblical theological spin on it, just right from that beginning. That's kind of what we spoke about as well. I mean, you've got this connection to the glory cloud, and we don't mean the podcast. We mean the actual glory cloud,
right.
Where you, right from the very beginning, have this stamp of eschatology, so to speak. Even before any soteriology is in view, right from the creation, this glimmer of what is to come, this brightness in the cloud, which then gets associated to what ultimately is the result of the 6 days of work, and then ultimately what is the end of what is the ultimate glorified reality, both for creation and for man. And so it's kind of and that's where it gets amazing, because it gets complicated for me. It gets I think definitely unique in that I've never seen these ideas brought together quite the way Klein does. But connecting that thing that he does with the manifestation of God in the cloud theophany, which he calls, and we spoke about indoxation. I'm trying to leave those words out of it just to not throw too much into this right now. But he speaks of this physical manifestation, so to speak, of what would otherwise be invisible, and that only for the point of showing us what we ultimately will experience visibly. And so there it is, right in the beginning, this cloud theophany. This is the place that this is what makes Eden, like the sanctuary, this temple. Man dwells in the hope of entering into that ultimate rest, as he has glimmers of this cloud theophany. And this is what then carries through even in redemption, and the temple, of course, becomes important. And then the idea of even just working to enter into rest, we see in Genesis 1, is mirrored by man's working to enter into rest. There's an imaging component there. And so all those sorts of things you could explore quite easily. And then there's maybe just worth mentioning as well, even if we're not going to go straight into it now, that way in which Klein speaks of the glory cloud having its kind of macrocosm represented in the creation itself as something that gives glory to God and images God's glory, and then the microcosm of that, if I understand it correctly, being man himself. And so all are combined via this temple idea, and this closely connected to the image. So again, very, very, all I'm wanting to do there is not necessarily explain all that, but just sort of go, there it is. All those little, spokes come out of this hub and are worth thinking about, and just amazing. And Images of the Spirit really is the book, right? If you wanted to go and check this out, we did say last time that strangely, actually, I find it quite strange that everyone loves that book. Even the people that are usually not so kind towards Klein are into Images of the Spirit, and I find a lot of provocative, maybe not provocative, but maybe a little bit controversial, just at least new and original stuff coming through there that I'm quite surprised that people have not taken up, had more issue with, in light of what he's saying. But it doesn't seem to be the case somehow, and that's great. So it gives you some sense of reassurance as you work through all this like completely otherwise like alien territory. But I suppose it's the deep resonance you have. It's just biblical. You can understand that what he's doing is he's just taking more of the data than normally is taken into account, and he's just pulling it all together in a way that's, at least just suggests a way to move forward in ways we might not have with the idea. So I think it's really an amazing book. It's not too long either. Yeah, it's
No.
you can get through the whole thing fairly quickly. I mean, you have to read it slowly, but the second time.
I'm not sure which is shorter, Images of the Spirit or By Oath Consigned, but it might be Klein's shortest book.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I think what happens is you have to focus so intently on what he's saying that time goes by really quickly as you read it, and then it ends up being quite a short book as well. So you feel like you can actually, it's a doable chunk. It's not like Kingdom Prologue where it's like, this is the next part of my life that I'm going to dedicate this to reading that book. It's not in the same way, but it is kind of a short, almost like feels to me the same sort of brain process as if you want to get through a heavy bit of logic or something. You want to just hunker down and work through that. But anyways, highly recommend. And usually it's one of his cheapest books to buy as well. They usually got some secondhand copies floating around, and you can get them, all over the place. If you don't want to. Is it online? I don't think it is online. It is on Logos. I know that much.
It is on Logos, and it's now published by Stock. Well, I think it has been for quite a while, but you can order it directly from them too.
Totally. Yeah, I've struggled to get any secondhand copies of Klein's book. They always usually are way up there, and just you might as well buy it new. And I know that was the one exception. But anyway, so there's that. Right, now, what I wanted to do is just think a little bit about, because I think probably the closest thinker that I have found in terms of dealing with the subject to Klein is Horton, and in terms of a contemporary sort of layout of the whole thing. And he's definitely impacted by Klein one way or another. You might even say it's just straight up Kleinian stuff coming through. But I don't know, as I read Horton, it's just kind of a different focus, maybe a little bit more on the covenant. And I was very interested in that. I'll just get your thoughts on that, Chris. But basically, for me coming into it, the interest was that Klein is basically saying, hey, it's not that God creates and then later on makes a covenant that he could, it's not like he could have created in the image of God, no less, and then just decided, you know what, I'm actually not gonna do anything with you guys. We're not gonna enter into glory after 6 days of work or anything like that. Klein he just does not like that idea at all. Even if that would be a condescension of God in any way, it's just not. It's a matter of justice for Klein in that what God has done in creation is already covenantal, and he's already, by virtue of this act of the fiat and the response and the imaging and all these things, there is a covenant that's been entered into by the time that man has seen the light of day. And at that point, intuitively almost, he knows I must follow my Creator and work to enter into rest. And this goal is before me. So it's not the fact that it's not that Klein has a problem with God freely entering into a covenant, but it's just that he really has a problem with that happening after the actual act of creation itself, and that has in fact, he once entered into. That it is a matter of God's justice to follow through with that. And he can't just bail out, or, that would be to encroach on his character and that sort of thing. So what I loved about that is the way he's connecting creation and image of God as a kind of pinnacle moment in creation to covenant itself. That's the covenant of works. So you don't have to go hunting around or waiting for that dialogue to happen that didn't really happen. You just have to study the creation account, and especially in a framework lens. It's just undeniable that as the suzerain, takes his seat in Sabbath glory, and the vassal king is pronounced as a vassal, essentially, how can it can't be anything but a covenant in ancient Near Eastern terms. So there's all of that. So it seems to me that Horton takes that idea and just rolls with it, and almost wants to say that the covenant, the covenant is the image, which I don't think Klein has said in so many words. But I was interested to get your perspective on what Horton was saying, number one, and how that measures with Klein.
I think Horton is working with all of the ideas that Klein mentions as image of God, but I don't think he really gives as much time in his book, The Christian Faith, to that third one, the formal or physical. I did find at the bottom of page 400 that he at least mentions the idea.
Right. He's
but
not
I didn't
opposed
really
to it. Yeah.
see him unpack it very much.
Right. Right.
I agree with you that he does seem the most interested in the covenantal aspect of all of this and the implications. And I think he and Klein would be on exactly the same page in terms of the covenant of works being simultaneous with being created in the image of God. And so, I really think that this doctrine, the image of God, really brings to a head all of the maybe the best way to talk about the controversy between the way the Westminster Confession talks about God condescending to make that first covenant and the Klein's objection to that, because what God freely did was create, and it's not that God wasn't free after that, but he set things up the way he wanted to. And then if we can talk about God being obligated, he obligated himself by creating a creature in his own image. That has necessary eschatological implications to it.
Right.
And not only does it contain the principle of simple justice and the works principle, where according to that ethical aspect, these human creatures were to be as much like their creator as they possibly could be. But then just in that functional sense as well, like you said, God did his work that he had laid out for himself to do, and he rewarded his very good work by sitting down and resting on his Sabbath throne on the seventh day. And the implication of that is that these human creatures were to do the work that God had given them to do, and then to join God in that Sabbath rest. So, the whole thing is encapsulated in creation in the image of God. You can't find any sunlight between creation in the image of God and the making of the covenant. They are simultaneous.
Right. Totally. Were you understanding Horton to be saying that the image is the covenant, or do you think he's not quite saying that?
I can see how you could read the beginning of the section on the image of God sort of that way, but then he ends up talking about other aspects.
There are other aspects. Yeah, it ends up just like very similar to Klein, except I think he adds a fourth one there, or it's a prophetic dimension, if I remember correctly. But anyways,
which still is drawing on Klein in images of the Spirit.
True. Yeah, totally. What was the thing with Klein? Like he wanted to leave that for post. It's sort of a redemptive thing. He didn't like to bring the prophetic idea prior to the fall, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. It does all get connected to the Holy Spirit, obviously.
Yes.
And it seems like he's constantly referring back to that hovering of the Holy Spirit over the unformed earth. But I think you're right that he prefers to leave the prophetic for post-fall. But he is certainly comfortable talking about the priestly aspect before the fall, because he describes Adam as a priest who was to guard the temple.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I always I remember seeing that, and I think as you said, it somehow does all flow back to that original source anyway. I think there was just probably a point that he wanted to really bring out. I can't remember what it was now. Anyways, leaving that aside, Horton's very much on the same page. The idea there, just with the image being covenantal as well, just leaving Horton for a second, one of the things I remember Klein doing at some point, I can't remember where I saw this, might have been Images, where he says, listen, another way to show how the image is essentially covenantal, if not the covenant, then something that basically is simultaneous with or closely parallels the covenant, is the fact that God created male and female in a marriage context, which is covenantal, and that being in His image. So there is that's quite an amazing thought that you have God entering into this relationship with man, which we're saying by virtue of Him doing so is covenantal, and then Him being made in the image of God in the relationship that reflects the covenant. It's just it's quite an amazing idea. So if not the covenant, it's just very, very, very close, and almost can't be thought of without the image of God. The one must be thought of with the other, which even if you just leave it at that, I think is profoundly helpful. Especially when you start getting to, as we said last time, and as many theologians have pointed out, like you want to know what the image is, then go to the perfect image of God in Christ. That's obviously where you would need to go. You need to almost work backwards from that point. And and what you do see, again, just relating this covenant idea, you do see the covenant servant, perfectly represented. Yeah, you have the one who works to enter into rest. He mirrors God. He is God, but he mirrors God as man, and does what Adam should have done by way of that covenantal arrangement. And so there's that, we saw the physical luminosity in the transfiguration. So all of that is there again, but I do think the covenant idea runs strong right throughout, in that whatever the covenant did to reflect the image of God, whatever part it played, it seems to correspond to what Jesus is as the covenant servant, perfectly representing that covenant servant, and so representing the glory of God in the image of man.
Amen.
Yeah. So there we go. There's a little something right there. Put that into your pipe and smoke it.
Do you mind if I riff on that for a minute?
Go for it.
So, because this is something that I wanted to say in the lost recordings from last week, but
the last
didn't end up
saying.
Second
epistle, the first epistle. Yeah, go for
it. Since the Hebrew word for covenant doesn't actually appear until Genesis chapter 6, Klein really felt the burden of proof to argue for there being a covenant there in creation. And this was one of the main pillars, I think, of his argument was the image of God. And this is an insight that I got from Lane Tipton toward the end of his time as a Kleinian. But this is really why we see the uniformity among all world religions. Every single world religion has a sense of an offended deity, and that they need to do something to appease that deity. And so every single world religion out there is based on works righteousness, because they are made in the image of God. They know they owe him that obedience, and they're desperately trying to bridge that gap. And Christianity is the only one that says, well, God sent a second Adam and he did it for you.
Yeah, and it's usually we would talk about that by way of a covenant of works anyway. We would say, well, it's that covenant of works on the heart of every fallen son of Adam, that broken covenant, that futility, that, sense in which he could never do what he was supposed to do, that eternity on his heart, so to speak. We usually use the covenant language to account for that, or the moral law written on the heart at very least. But the image is really ultimately what we're grasping at there, I think, in that, you've got a more direct sort of sense, like as man was created, he's supposed to be doing what, he's supposed to be holy, but he's not. He's supposed to be earning heaven, but he's not. He's supposed to be doing all these direct imaging things. And so I think it's a really helpful way to think about all of that. Thinking about that as well, one of the things I thought would be really helpful, although I haven't quite mapped it out yet, is that there's always been this bit of a tension as to, okay, well, how does fallen man have the image of God? Still, or does he? Is it marred? Is it lost? Is it gone? Is it there? Or what's going on? And I think if you think about it in terms of covenant, if it doesn't solve the problem, at least gives you some clues or handles to work with. In that, let's say for argument's sake, the place to, and I think I'm just again going from memory. I don't have it in front of me now, but I think somewhere around Horton's opening chapter there, he says, listen, the image is not something in man; it's something between man and God. It's something outside of man in terms of his relationship with God. And so I think there he has this covenant idea in mind. And so if that's true, and if we can see that image primarily in his arrangement with God, his relationship to God covenantally, then it's almost like you can continue to see exactly what you were just talking about now. You can see exactly what the mod image is. It's that man remains in that relationship with God. No one is not in a relationship with God. Everyone is in a very intimate relationship with God. The issue is never that you need to be in a relationship with God. Everyone is already in a relationship with God. The issue is just what kind of relationship. Like, is it a relationship that you have transgressed in, and that you under Adam are at least doing what Adam did and have fallen under Adam? Certainly, it's not a legitimate path to eternal life anymore. But it remains upon the head of everyone in terms of their condemnation, and that condemnation is essentially that image and covenant. And so it's just a helpful way to think about the remaining image. Even in terms of a dignity for fallen man, they're still fallen sons of Adam in a relationship with God. It's not that they have been relegated to some other status, or they will be brought before the judge. The Creator knows of them, they will have to give an account. I mean, that's something that you would, that's not something that is going to be asked of everything that God made, so to speak. And so there is something there that I think is very helpful to work with and elaborate on that idea of fallenness, image of God and fallenness.
Yeah, it's I don't mean to belabor the point about it being marred or distorted, but the first image that popped into my head was the most recent and probably last Rambo movie, which I just watched with my wife a few weeks ago.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've seen it, and I don't know if this is going to translate with all of your listeners, but
dude, Rambo always translates.
So in this last movie, Rambo's an old man, and he's got this woman and this teenage girl living on his ranch with him, and the teenage girl is just insistent that she's going to go south of the border to Mexico to find her father and find out why he left her and her mother. And Rambo says, don't do it, give this a few more years at least, and then we'll revisit this. Well, she does it anyway. He goes down after her to rescue her, and all of these wicked, evil sex traffickers gang up on him and beat him half to death. And you just see his face after this beating. It's John Rambo.
Yeah.
But boy, is that image distorted.
Yeah. Right. Totally.
And that's what sin has done to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose, again, you're referring to something physical and an image there. And I think, for me, it's always been a bit of a struggle to figure out, okay, but what does that mean then? And I think if you're thinking in terms of ontology, or you're thinking in terms of relationship, it really does matter in terms of how you're going to process what that marring looks like. Because obviously we know God doesn't look like a man, in terms of, so there's something that's being referred to here. And if it's distorted, then what exactly is distorted? And I think it's the relationship itself that's distorted. It's the actual, man has turned away from his Creator. He's transgressed the covenant. He has no interest in the very things that he was covenanted to do. Or if he does, he's doing it to his own glory rather than God's. He's doing it to futility rather than Sabbath rest. He's doing it unto judgment rather than, where it should go. And so it's like the whole thing is there, but it's exactly what you said. In terms of that mod image, it's just if you use that as a symbol for the relationship itself, I mean, I think it's really helpful to just quantify what that's all about, if that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, again, and I'm reading a lot into the image idea there. So, I'll leave it to the listener to process that and think about whether they like that idea or not. But I think for me, I'm more and more, maybe even, maybe even more than Klein himself has wanted to go, maybe even more than Horton. Although, I want to major in on that idea. I think it's really helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
So there we go. You can choose either Klein or Horton or me. Just put it out there. I mean, I won't be offended. I won't be offended if you go with someone else. All right, good. Well, that sort of moves us to the end. Hopefully that gets us more or less on the same page. Later on, I do want to come back to just kind of the temple thing and the I suppose, what is it? The cosmic, the macro and the micro and all that stuff. I mean, I think there's just so much there that it's just helpful, with anyone thinking about Klein's stuff. And then and to register cosmology. I don't know if we did something like that before. I think we might have. But yesterday I posted you, or I sent you a little quote from this thing I found from Klein. He was reviewing some science book, and amazing, like totally amazing.
That was yes.
So,
that was mind blowing.
Yeah, just on the two kingdom thing, I liked it because it's like, well, for me, what it did was it just emphasized that thing that you normally never emphasize with the two kingdom aspect, which is that we do have a mandate, culturally speaking, as well as a mandate in terms of redemption. And Klein seemed to really have a good grasp on that and emphasize both. And obviously, it seems quite obvious now that I think about it. But anyways, we'll come back to that and look around those areas in the future. But let's drop it there for now.
All right. Thanks, Mike. I really appreciated that.
Thanks, Chris. All right, let's play the sucker out. You ready? And here we go.